Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are now almost midway of our fourth season, and we remain just as excited as from the beginning to help you explore and understand that unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here are issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we interview experts for today's show on energy production and consumption. And we're going to be focusing today on why are we in an energy crisis, environmental and health impacts. Now, the world indeed is facing, or should I say is already in an energy crisis, but that's on a number of levels. And with the increasing demand for electricity and our limited natural resources is really the culprit. Climate change, global warming, the overconsumption of finite resources such as fossil fuels have all contributed to this crisis, and the environmental and health impacts have been immense. The energy crisis really is a term used to describe a situation where the demand for energy outstrips supply, resulting in an increase in energy prices, which we all feel, and increased dependence on non-renewable sources of energy, which is a good thing. In recent years, the global energy crisis has been a major focus of both governments and businesses because it has important implications for our economic growth, for poverty reduction, and environmental protection. And all of these, we are really seeing and experiencing them right now. So in today's show, we're going to discuss why we are in an energy crisis, and again, how it impacts our environment as well as our health, and what can we do to resolve these issues. The overwhelming demand for energy, again, is the main culprit behind the crisis today. The most common causes are increasing population growth, urbanization, and changing lifestyles that require more and more power, like air conditioning or longer working hours, and of course, technology advances. In addition to these factors, there are other possible causes which we probably haven't even figured out yet, such as political conflicts like wars between Russia and Ukraine, over resources, and technological inefficiencies that lead to underutilized capacity. Also, natural disasters like earthquakes, wildfires can disrupt production or transport of coal, oil, or gas and cause electrical fires and cause other temporary shortages. Our energy crisis mode can and does have far-reaching effects on communities and economies and households all around the world. When resources become scarce, it can lead to higher prices, which affects both producers or suppliers, as well as the consumers who rely on affordable sources of energy for their daily needs, and in some cases for their daily existence. And this can increase debt levels for countries and households, as they must borrow money for additional fuel imports due to limited domestic stockpiles. In addition, companies may be forced to spend more and more for energy, which increases their cost further. And of course, they pass it on to us as consumers. Or it can also cause delay in projects already underway due to unexpected delays in construction or financing. But the good news is that it's forcing companies to investigate, consider, and to invest in renewable energy sources. Now, let's look briefly at the environmental impacts of the energy crisis, because burning fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas releases large amounts of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere, which is contributing to global warming, among other things. And this causes some of the extreme weather patterns that we've been seeing, including more intense storms, rising sea levels, and more frequent droughts due to climate change. As well, the destruction of forest from deforestation accelerates climate change as well. And then turning to the health impacts briefly of the energy crisis, the burning of fossil fuels not only affects the atmosphere, but also has numerous health impacts both locally and globally. Air pollution causes serious respiratory diseases such as asthma or exacerbates them that can cause long-term health problems such as emphysema, cancer, cardiovascular disease, especially heart attacks, stroke, as well as some neurological diseases, just to name a few. As well, nuclear power generation may be associated with some potentially hazardous environmental impacts, which really require, and I think undergoing, are further investigations because these are needed to look at some of those potential effects on human health for those living near facilities in order to provide reliable information about the radioactivity caused cancer risk as well as other issues associated with human health for those who live close to nuclear power plants. Now, it's vital at this point that we take steps to reduce our reliance on the finite resources in order to tackle global emissions released or resultant through fuel combustion, chief among which is an increase in our renewable energy sources. It seems as though to me, though, that now we're in this perfect storm. We're in an energy crisis due to dwindling natural resources to produce it, and the way we've been producing it, causing overwhelmingly serious environmental and health issues. Now, to me, that is an immense opportunity because we have to do something, and the opportunity is to do it right in a way that helps and preserves the environment and, most importantly, our health. So now this is a lot. But here today to help us explore, unpack, and understand this some more are two experts, and we are looking forward to them making us smarter. Today we have with us Mark Jacobson. Mark is at Stanford University, and he is director of the Atmosphere and Energy Program and professor of civil and environmental engineering. Mark is also a senior fellow of the Woods Institute for the Environment and of the Precourt Institute for Energy. Mark's career focuses on better understanding air pollution and global warming problems and developing large-scale clean, renewable energy solutions to them. He has served on an advisory committee to the U.S. Secretary of Energy, and his work is the scientific basis of the energy portion of the U.S. Green New Deal and the laws that go to 100% renewable energy in cities, states, and countries worldwide. Welcome, Mark, and did I get all of that right?
Thank you very much, Bernice. Yes, very kind introduction.
Thank you for making time to be with us as well. Our other guest is Rahul Srinivasan. Rahul is Senior Energy Specialist at Sustainable Energy for All. Rahul has deep and extensive international experience, which spans the sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, East Asia, and the Americas, in renewables, energy access, energy health nexus, and climate-friendly cooling, which he's going to have to tell us about. At Sustainable Energy for All, Rahul works at the intersection of energy and health, driving the deployment of clean energy solutions in health facilities to create stronger and more resilient health systems in developing countries. Now, prior to joining Sustainable Energy for All, Rahul worked at the World Bank, where he co-managed global and cross-sectorial efficient clean cooling program, which focused on climate-friendly cold chains for health, which included COVID-19 and beyond, as well as agriculture sectors, which dealt with food security and safety. And then prior to joining the World Bank, Rahul worked in private sector energy consulting, dealing with wind, solar, and natural gas. Welcome, Rahul. Did I get all of that right?
Thank you, Bernice. Pleasure to be on the show.
And again, thank you for joining us and taking time to be with us today. Now, we have just a few minutes before we move to the break, but I want to start with you, Mark. What has caused the global energy crisis? And again, I know that crisis is at a number of levels, and I want to touch upon all of those today, but what's caused it?
Well, at a kind of macro level, of course, rising population and increasing energy demand is really driving the need for more energy. But at the same time, our supply of energy has been constrained mostly to fossil fuels for the last 150 years. And we've been relying on that and not transitioning earlier to renewable energy sources. the fact that we have to rely on fossil fuels means that we have to keep digging for new fossil fuels. In North America, 50,000 new oil and gas wells are drilled every year. In the U.S. alone, there are 1.3 million active oil and gas wells and 3.2 million abandoned ones. And we have to just keep digging for oil and gas and coal continuously, and also uranium for nuclear power. And these are depletable resources, so it becomes harder and harder to find these resources as we move on. And ultimately, we have shortages, and compared with the demand. But we really need to transition to a 100% renewable energy infrastructure to solve this problem.
And again, every time I hear that or I read that or look at it, again, I get warm because, again, it's an opportunity. Yeah, transition is always an opportunity. We know, and we've been beating that drum for years, that we've got to go to renewables. But by helping to drive that, because I'm not sure we'd get there all on our own, because it's a good thing to do. But, certainly the crisis and the shortages is helping to drive that. And so I just see that as one great big opportunity. And we just have 1 minute to go. So I want to start this question really briefly with you, Rahul. Again, we'll start, but we'll finish it on the other side of the break. And that is, what is the impact of energy or energy crisis on our health and health care? And again, just touch upon that briefly before we go to break.
Thanks, Bernice. I guess my intervention is more for the developing world. So we're talking about Africa and South Asia primarily here. I think the energy crisis here is that many health facilities, as well as other public institutions, do not have access to electricity. I think that's a huge issue. And I think what is often not understood or emphasized enough is that a lot of the healthcare infrastructure that we depend on is dependent on reliable electricity. So unless we are able to power health facilities as well as other social institutions such as schools, we are not going to be able to advance human capital development. I think that is something which we really need to focus on, that powering healthcare, providing reliable access to electricity in healthcare facilities is critical to making sure that we have robust health infrastructure and also to make sure that people are able to enjoy quality life.
Indeed. And we had a guest on last week, and we really did dig into that. Thank you. We're going to go to break now. We'll be right back on the other side with Mark Jacobson at Stanford University and Rahul Srinivasan at Sustainable Energy for All. Thank you. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Central Markets, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, and available for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lynndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. To today's show on energy production and consumption, focusing on why are we in an energy crisis, environmental and health impacts. And again, we're back with Mark Jacobson at Stanford University and Rahul Srinivasan at Sustainable Energy for All. And so we want to go back. Before the break, we were talking with Rahul a bit about the impact of energy and the energy crisis on our health and healthcare. And we had talked about the significance on the healthcare system. And so I want to drill down a little bit on that, or as I like to say, connect the dots, to bring it down to our actual health. And so I'd like you to talk about the impact of the energy crisis a little bit on our actual health. And I know that, that probably takes a road through the healthcare system, one way or the other, but just connect those dots for us, if you would.
Sure. And as I mentioned, reliable electricity is critical to saving lives. And let me give you a few examples. If you essentially want a mother to deliver a baby safely during night or during emergencies, you need electricity. If you want to make sure that patients that are, say, suffering from COVID have access to oxygen concentrators, have access to ventilators. These need to be powered by electricity. Medical equipment needs to be constantly sterilized. That needs electricity. Essentially, a lot of the equipment that is used to treat patients, to detect diseases, needs electricity. And in many places in sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia, this electricity is pretty much absent. So keeping in mind that reliable electricity is essential for universal health care, I think it's extremely important to understand that the energy crisis in these developing countries is actually more related to the absence of electricity. Now, let me give you some statistics which are really shocking in the 21st century. More than 1 billion people in developing countries essentially rely on health facilities that either have no access to electricity or have access to unreliable electricity. 1 billion people. That's a shocking figure. And then if you look at the health facilities themselves, in sub-Saharan Africa, around 15% of all the health facilities have absolutely no access to electricity. Similarly, in South Asia, that number is 12%. Now, in terms of numbers, if I look at sub-Saharan Africa, I mentioned 15% of the health facilities have no access to electricity whatsoever. That translates to around 25,000 health facilities. So this is the kind of energy crisis that we're talking about, where there's no electricity to make sure that a mother is not delivering a baby under candlelight or torchlight. I'm talking about an energy crisis where people are essentially losing lives because medicines and vaccines cannot be stored in refrigerators that need electricity. Okay. So that's the kind of energy crisis I'm talking about.
I can think of some others. It seems to me as you're talking, what comes to my mind too is the impacts or effects of energy producers perhaps digging more, trying to create more fossil fuel energy, as opposed to going whole hog all into renewables. I have to think as they perhaps search for more and more fossil fuels that, and we'll talk about this a little bit later with Mark, certainly environmental issues, as they dig more, and those same environmental issues would drive some health impacts perhaps too. So I see some that way in terms of a direct impact. Also, too, I've always been told by a lot of researchers and scientists, too, that we globally need to pay attention to things happening in developing countries where we tend not to, because in many cases, in a number of cases, what we're seeing there is a rehearsal for what we might see. But unfortunately, we tend to kind of dismiss it because we're not a developing country. I don't have to be concerned about that. But again, in many cases, it's proven in the past that things they do or they experience is indeed a rehearsal. For example, as you were talking about the really kind of the energy insecurity, what they don't have good solid sources of energy, electricity, and how it cripples the hospitals. Well, seems like we've seen some of that in Hurricane Katrina and some other places when we are crippled with energy insecurity by way of a lot of the extreme weather events that fossil fuel generated climate change is causing. So again, it does seem like maybe some of the things that the developing countries are seeing is a rehearsal. I want to move now to Mark and if you talk to us a little bit, Mark, about what are the effects of the energy crisis on the environment and our day-to-day lives?
Well, I look at this a lot. The biggest impact of energy, fossil fuel energy in particular, but also bioenergy, is death and illness to people. 7 million people die from air pollution each year. And as you mentioned earlier, these air pollution deaths, they're due to enhanced heart disease. Like, for example, if you have a heart attack in polluted air, you're more likely to die of that heart attack than if you have a heart attack in clean air. Stroke, chronic bronchitis, emphysema, pneumonia, lung cancer, bronchial cancer, asthma. These are all, when you add up all the additional deaths that air pollution triggers, it's about 7 million per year. 20% are children under the age of 5 years old. You can imagine, and these children are mostly in developing countries because they're exposed to indoor burning of biomass and coal for home heating and cooking, and their little bodies can't take it. So air pollution reduces their immune system, and they end up dying of pneumonia. So this is a preventable problem. Air pollution is a preventable problem, but 90% of it's driven by energy. And so I would say the biggest health disaster of the 21st century still is air pollution, and it's a treatable problem, and we can treat it by transitioning to everything to electricity. Instead of burning things, we should go to electricity, where the electricity is provided only with clean renewable energy, namely wind, water, and solar power sources. But the additional impacts, besides environmental impacts, of course, global warming is a rising problem as well, and that is already causing devastation, will catch up with air pollution as leading cost, environmental cost. Air pollution costs on the order of $30 trillion per year today, based on statistical cost of life. It's by 2050, the world is expected to spend about $30 trillion per year to address global warming problems, which we can already see in terms of enhanced wildfires, loss of crops, droughts, floods, increased intensity of storms, rising sea levels, and shifts in agriculture as well. And then, of course, there are other problems associated with the current energy, groundwater pollution, and environmental damage due to all the mining. I mean, 1.3% of all U.S. land area, for example, is consumed by the fossil fuel industry. And as I mentioned, 50,000 new oil and gas wells every year, drilled every year in North America. So there's just a plethora of problems with the current energy infrastructure that affect the environment, but these problems can be solved.
Indeed. And we haven't even talked today. We've talked on other shows about the economics of it. But just as you were talking, I was thinking about, as a crisis consumes, the price of electricity increases. And as we said earlier, that's affecting companies, and they pass it on to us. So that's affecting the prices we pay for goods and services day to day, as well as the health cost. As the price of fuel, whatever it is, goes up, that's reflected in our foods and many other things. So it certainly makes a difference. So thank you for kind of helping us to understand that a little bit. Want to move back now to Rahul. Rahul, something I noticed in your bio and I wanted to ask you about, and that was climate. You mentioned you deal with climate-friendly cooling, and I think you said it was cooling chains. Help us understand what that's about and why it's needed.
So I guess just one point that I wanted to make regarding the energy crisis, firstly, was I think there's a huge scope for renewables to be used in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia to essentially make sure that health facilities are electrified moving forward. Now, cold chains are an essential part of developing the health infrastructure. So what do we mean by cold chains? So let me give an example of what we saw during the COVID-19 crisis, which is not yet over. We needed to make sure that vaccines move from lab to jab, as I like to mention. And it's important to make sure that these vaccines were transported at appropriate temperatures and then also stored at appropriate temperatures before they could be injected into patients, before they could be deployed. So that is what we refer to as cold chains. And those are very critical to health infrastructure. And sometimes these vaccines could be stored in health centers. Sometimes they could be stored in essentially vaccine centers. And when I say that we want to make sure that these cold chains and health infrastructure are climate friendly, this could take three forms. Firstly, as I mentioned, we could look at renewables, make sure that health facilities are electrified using solar energy. So think of having solar panels on rooftops of health facilities where vaccines are stored or where patients are treated. The second issue could be looking at energy efficiency, making sure that energy is optimized in terms of consumption. Also make sure that there are active and passive means of using energy in an appropriate manner. When I talk about active means, this means using healthcare equipment that consumes lesser energy. When I talk of passive means, that essentially looks at how your health facility or your building is designed so that lesser energy is needed to electrify some of the medical equipment that is housed in the facility. And then the third way of looking at climate-friendly cold chains is looking at the kind of refrigerants we are using in refrigerators. We want to make sure that those are essentially low global warming potential refrigerants. So those are some of the key components when we are looking at climate-friendly cooling in the context of electrifying health centers as well as electrifying cooling.
Thank you for that. We're going to go to break now, but when we come back from break, I want to come back to you, Rahul, because I want to talk about why the rest of us not just should, but must care about the issues on energy crisis in the developing nations. We'll be right back on the other side with Mark Jacobson and Rahul Srinivasan. Thank you all. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. To today's show on energy production and consumption, where we're focusing today on why are we in an energy crisis, its environmental and health impacts. And we are back with Mark Jacobson with Stanford University and Rahul Srinivasan with Sustainable Energy for All. And they really are making us smarter. So we want to go back to Rahul was talking to us before the break. In telling us again about effects on the healthcare and health industry in the developing countries. And I want you to talk to us about why we all must care. In other words, how does it impact us?
Bernice, I think firstly, it doesn't matter if you're in the developed world or the developing world. The thought of a mother struggling to have a normal delivery and the whole thought of infant mortality because of lack of energy infrastructure, I think should really impact all of us, should be something that all of us should care about. Similarly, all of us know of a friend or a relative or a distant acquaintance who passed during the COVID-19 crisis. Some of them in developing countries passed away because they did not have access to medicines or vaccines that cannot be stored at appropriate temperatures. I'm sure all of us can relate to this, regardless of where we live. But I think also looking at a practical level, if some of these epidemics start in developing countries and cannot be controlled, treated, or detected because of lack of energy infrastructure, we must remember that these epidemics can move to other parts of the world. We are in an increasingly interconnected world. So wherever this epidemic might start and it's not controlled there because of an energy crisis, it could very well move to other parts of the world.
I do believe that we all have just come through and seen proof of that.
Absolutely. The COVID-19 crisis is a standing example. And these epidemics are not going to stop. I mean, if you speak to health scientists, if you speak to practitioners in the health sector, they will tell you that they're probably even going to you'll be on the rise and probably be even more severe. So you want to make sure that what is happening in one part of the world is not ignored by folks in other parts of the world, whether you're in the developing world or in the developed country. I think we have one Earth, one planet. We must respect that and really be sensitive towards issues that are being faced in other parts of the world.
Indeed. But one of the purpose of this radio program, Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, as we talked about it and developed it and tried to key in on what's our slice of contributing to the world and the knowledge base in here. Our slice and our direction was to show people why they must care and how interconnected environment and health is. And I think this is certainly one of those prime examples in, if you say there's something, the good part about COVID, and there were some good parts about it, believe it or not. And that's one of those good parts. It raised everybody's awareness of just how interconnected we are. Because I think it's stamped and engraved into all of our minds that COVID started over in China. And we saw how quickly, how potently it can get over to us and the whole world. And COVID is certainly not by itself. So that was a watershed learning event for everybody. And as you just mentioned, and we have guests who tell us almost every show, and I tell people the phrase I use on the radio show, it's coming for us all, that it's going to be more of that. And so we know there's going to be more of it. And we now know that we all will be affected by it. And so that's one of the things that we certainly like to point out in terms of why people must care. In other words, what's in it for them? That's what's in it for them. Because many times they're not necessarily moved by it's the right thing to do. Because we're all busy and we're all trying to push things off of our tables. But this is one that you can't, and here's why. Similar thing with air pollution. All of us, I think now have seen or heard our weatherman talk in the summer about the Saharan red dust. And I like to point out to people, you know this, you see it. So if that dust can come all the way from Africa to Dallas, Texas, or Washington, D.C., or Boston, that's air. Many things travel in that air. So it really does affect us all. So thank you again for pointing that out to us. Mark, I want to go back to you at this point. What steps do you think can be taken to reduce our energy consumption?
Yeah, there's a lot. Individuals can do a lot and on their own, but also by changing our energy infrastructure, that also reduces our consumption. I mean, starters, 11% of all energy worldwide is used to mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels and uranium. By going to clean renewable energy, we do not need to use that 11% of the energy anymore because wind comes right to the turbine, solar comes right to the panel. We don't need to mine or dig for fuels. Second, by going to electric heat pumps instead of natural gas heaters for air heating, water heating, air conditioning in our homes and businesses, that reduces end use. I mean, each heat pump uses about 1/4 the energy as a natural gas heater. But averaged worldwide over all energy sectors, by transitioning to heat pumps, we'd save about 15% of all energy worldwide. Similarly, going to electric vehicles, each electric vehicle uses about 1/4 the energy as a gasoline or diesel vehicle. But worldwide, if we transition all vehicles to either battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell electric, we would reduce energy demand by about 23% worldwide. Similarly, going to electrified industry, electrifying all industrial processes, high temperature processes, instead of burning oil, gas, or coal for heat, if we use electric arc furnaces, electric induction furnaces, electric resistance furnaces, we'd save another 4% of energy worldwide. On top of that, end-use energy efficiency improvement, going to LED lights instead of incandescent lights, more energy-efficient refrigerators, more just weatherizing your home, like putting just sealing up cracks in doors and windows reduces energy loss. Other types of end-use energy efficiency improvement, more telecommuting, working from home through the computer rather than driving to work. That we can already going to get a lot of energy improvements from that, but let's say we squeeze a few more percent energy efficiency improvements, just without really changing our habits, we can reduce energy demand by on the order of 56 to 60% worldwide. That by going to clean renewable electricity for all purposes. So those are the things that we can do. Is really in your own home. Go to next time you need a new heater to replace your gas heater, go to an electric heat pump. To replace your stove, your gas stove, with electric induction cooktop stove. That'll also reduce harmful air pollutants in your home. Go to more energy efficient light bulbs, energy efficient appliances, weatherize your home. Those are the things that people can do individually, in addition to support policies by your politicians to transition to clean renewable energy.
And let me ask you this, and I'd ask both of you all this question. What do you think is the bigger driver? Are consumers and the actions they take to reduce energy driving the public policy business, or does public policy and business drive consumers more at this point? What do you think?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, consumers, well, certainly policies by politicians will definitely, financial incentives will encourage people to do a lot of things. But, if everybody wants to go electric and realizes themselves, and part of my job is to try to educate the public about this is actually better for your pocketbook. I mean, I have built a home in 2017 with no gas. It's all electric, with heat pumps, with electric induction, with solar on the roof, batteries in the garage, electric car. I have not paid an electric bill, a natural gas bill, or gasoline bill in 6 years, and I've saved a lot of money because I did not need natural gas, and there's no reason anybody should have both natural gas and electricity in their home, two sources of energy. It's just, why spend money on pipes, gas pipes? Why spend money on a gas hookup fee, on carbon monoxide monitors, other gas infrastructure when you don't need it? And it's just something that contractors like to encourage you to spend more money. And so I've actually paid off the whole system in 5 years, and my electricity, my natural gas, my cars are electric, so my energy for my vehicles is free for the next 20 years.
It seems like to me we need to be talking much more about the economics. Because again, our theory on this show and our research is people are moved by money and economics. So if we have a constant drumbeat and commercials and all of that about you're saving this much or you can save this much, etc., or it's costing you this much, I think that would go a long way too. We need some energy efficient or energy crisis marketing agencies who specialize in that and telling people, because again, most people are moved by what's in it for me. What's in it for me is saving money, and that's the prime mover. Saving money or making money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree.
We got to go to break here shortly. When we come back, though, I want to move to you, Rahul, because I want to talk about what we have learned from the developing world in terms of energy crisis, what we can do, and to see if there are any outstanding models out there already that we can use. So I want to talk about that on the other side, and we will be back on the other side of the break with Mark Jacobson with Stanford University and Rahul Srinivasan with Sustainable Energy for All. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the North Texas communities and the DFW Metroplex. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Central Market, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach. None mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today, to our show on energy production and consumption, focusing on why are we in an energy crisis, impacts on environment and health. And we are back with Mark Jacobson at Stanford University and Rahul Srinivasan with Sustainable Energy for All. And we do really appreciate you all joining us because you really are making us smarter about all of this. Now, as I mentioned before the break, want to go back to Rahul and tell us, Rahul, what have we learned in terms of the energy crisis, consumption, how we deal with it, health impacts from the developing world? Because, again, very often out of necessity, which is a mother of invention, out of necessity, they have to do some things that we maybe not tried. And, again, we know history has shown us that many times what's happening in developing countries is a rehearsal for the rest of us, believe it or not, as opposed to vice versa in many instances.
It's an excellent question. Mark spoke about how developed countries have been using fossil fuels for years. And you spoke about the issues that are faced due to hurricanes, due to climate impacts, which completely cripple the health infrastructure in some of the island countries. Now, in sub-Saharan Africa and some parts of South Asia, because there's no electricity in some of these remote communities, say in health centers, because it's not economical to extend the central grid. In many cases, also diesel generators are used, which are extremely polluting. So this has actually, given rise to the advent of decentralized renewable energy or localized renewable energy in various health facilities in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Now, what do I mean by this? This essentially means that you have solar panels that are just for the building, just for the health facility that is being electrified. These are quickly deployable. These are affordable over the long term. I want to kind of add that. So it might be expensive in terms of capital costs, but it's super affordable over the long term. And Mark alluded to this too in his speech. And then they're also very climate friendly. So we're not depending on diesel generators. We are not making ourselves vulnerable to a central grid that could be impacted by a climate catastrophe. So we're going for localized, decentralized renewable energy solutions that are quickly deployable, that are affordable over the long term, and are climate friendly. And I think this is what can be adopted in the developed world as well. I know in the developed world you have centralized grids, still a lot of fossil fuels being used, but I think there's a great way, there's a lot of scope to learn from the developing world and move towards decentralized renewable solutions.
And I can think of a lot was going through my mind as you were describing that decentralized, localized renewable energy. And I can see a lot of transferability, especially given the extreme weather events. Each part of our country has its own jam in terms of an extreme weather. Like California, it's wildfires. Here in Texas, it's floods and droughts. In the East, you all have snow and floods and probably some other things that I can't think of. So each of us has our thing. And I can imagine in some areas where they know the grid is weak and it tends to go out all the time with these events, that they could then have some type of localized renewable energy to serve as a backup. Like various homeowners association, or, I lived in Florida for a while, and you have a lot of coastal gated communities, high-end coastal gated communities. And many of those get inundated when there's hurricanes, floods, and other things. So I can immediately see that may be one of the things that's transferable. Mark, I want to go back to you now, and that is, what problems were we trying to solve? Climate change, air pollution, these are some of the things, but what would you say are the top problems we're trying to solve? And then what are the solutions?
Well, in my mind, the top problems associated with energy are air pollution. 7 million people die from air pollution every year worldwide. Hundreds of millions more have become ill. Global warming, which is it will surpass air pollution in terms of cost, probably before 2050, but at least by 2050. And then energy security. Fossil fuels are limited resources. They will run out at some point. And if we don't change our energy infrastructure, that will result in social, economic, and political instability and chaos. But there are other types of energy instability associated with fossil fuels. For example, some countries have control over the fuels of other countries, and so they can...
Like we're seeing now.
Yeah, we can see that with Russia holding natural gas against Europe's. The only good thing that's come out of that is that Europe is now transitioning faster to renewable energy and to become more reliant, because they realize that you can't rely on other countries to supply your energy at all times. Another type of energy insecurity problem is there are many island countries that you require the transport of fossil fuels by ship to those islands, and as a result, the price of energy is extremely high. For example, Hawaii on its own has the highest electricity price of any state in the United States by far. It's like twice the next state. It's like over 35 cents a kilowatt hour versus about 18 cents a kilowatt hour on average. And some island countries are 55 to 60 or even 70 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity, because you have to transport fuel. And if those countries or those island countries can actually provide all their own energy from wind, water, and solar, they eliminate that whole cost, and their electricity prices plummet, and that just gives their whole population a breathing room and to grow and flourish, which they couldn't do before.
Why aren't some of those solutions being carried out?
Well, they are actually. Hawaii actually has a law now to go to 100% renewable electricity. And in fact, there are 18 U.S. states and territories that have laws, or 19 now, since Minnesota just passed one a few weeks ago. And there are 62 countries that have passed laws to go to 100% renewables. There are over 180 U.S. cities that have passed laws or regulations. There are over 400 cities worldwide. Over 400 international businesses have passed resolutions to provide 100% renewables for their global operations. So there is this movement in a lot of places to transition, but we're still stymied not only by the lack of information. In a lot of places they're not confident that they can transition, but there's so many lobbyists in the fossil fuel industry trying to poison the ideas that renewables are useful. One of the common things is they scare people. These lobbyists scare people to say, well, if you go to renewables, the grid will not be reliable. This is actually dispelled. We found out, like in South Australia, 70% of the electricity is now provided by wind and solar. And in Australia, South Australia is the region with the best reliability outside of Tasmania. And what does Tasmania have? It's all hydropower, which is also renewable. So the two regions in Australia that have the most renewable energy actually have the most reliable grids. There are actually also 10 countries in the world that are 100% renewables, mostly driven by hydropower. So I don't know. So fossil fuels are causing problems. Fossil fuels are promoting things like carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen. These are things that just continue to allow the fossil fuel industry to persist. Same thing with small modular nuclear reactors. Regular nuclear reactors, they're taking 17 to 21 years between planning and operation. And yet countries are trying to spend billions because the nuclear lobby has promoted this, that nuclear is a good solution, but it's a horrible solution. You can't, if we want to plan today, 2023, for a new nuclear power plant, it wouldn't be ready till 2040. We need to solve 80% of the climate problem by 2030. We can't rely on things that take forever, and the cost of nuclear is about 7 to 8 times more per kilowatt hour than new wind or solar. So, just these promotion of non-solutions is one of the major barriers to transition because we have to compete with those non-solutions.
And it's unfortunate because that's happening in a lot of other aspects of our environmental issues. As you were saying that, I was just thinking about a conversation I had the other day with a researcher on recycling. You know, how the package industry is perpetrating recycling, and many plastics can never be recycled. But anyway, we will get there. But you know what it seems to me as we talk here, and we've only got 3 more minutes to go before we have to close out the show. But it appears to me as that these emergencies are the things that tend to be driving us forward. These emergency situations or other occurrences, then we get a big push. You know, like with COVID, like with the Russian-Ukrainian war. Those things give us the big push. I guess they say necessity is the mother of invention, huh?
Yeah, I mean, that happened during World War II. I mean, the U.S. built 300,000 airplanes in 5 years. The world built 800,000. I mean, we can transition. We actually need a World War II type transition right now for renewable energy to do something, to do this transition on the time scale we need, which is really rapid, 80% within 7 years.
Indeed, and we don't seem to move until there's an emergency. Rahul, go ahead. You want to weigh in?
Yeah, and if I may add, I think for the small island countries, the climate crisis has been an eye-opener. They understand that if they do not wean off fossil fuels and do not embrace renewables, they're going to be underwater. They're going to be under a huge climate catastrophe. So I think, as you said, necessity is the mother of invention, and we must learn from developing countries and other contexts on how to use climate-friendly solutions and technologies to advance this energy revolution, if I may call it so.
Indeed. Last thing for both of you all. Rahul, what are, or do you know of any often overlooked or unthought of kinds of risks that have been posed by or that we've learned from the energy crisis in terms of our health?
No, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned earlier in the call, many people seem to recognize that ventilators and oxygen concentrators need electricity only during the COVID-19 crisis. Suddenly, during COVID-19, people were like, health facilities need to be electrified. People are going to die. And we were, yes, this is true. And this is something that we've been talking about for a while. So most of the life-saving medical equipment need electricity. And that's why, as I mentioned, if I could use one tagline for this show, it would be that reliable electricity is critical to save lives, whether it's in the developed world or in the developing world.
Indeed. Thank you for that. And when people, all they got to do is think about it and they realize it. It's all these things that we go along day to day depending on, they just kind of meld into our lives and we don't think of them. We just use them. Last thing, Mark, you get the last word in terms of what you would say, how people can help drive solutions to these or what you're seeing in your work. Because I noticed, too, that you did some work on the Green New Deal. So talk to us just a minute, last word about that.
Well, first I want to say that I think that we can solve this problem if we all act together and work together to solve the problem. So this requires individuals to take action. It requires communities to take action. It requires states and countries all to take action. So there are multiple levels. And what individuals can do, they can change things in their own home, electrify your home, go to electric heat pumps, electric induction cooktops, electric cars, if you can, solar on your roof or a battery in your garage. Go to LED lights, energy-efficient appliances, weatherize your home, but also act in your community. Try to encourage others to do the same thing and encourage policymakers to do this. And, together, if we work hard together, that's the only way we're really going to solve it because we need everybody to participate. It's such a large problem. It's not something that will just be solved on its own. Indeed.
Thank you for that, Mark. And one of the things I want to note that you said, too, and that's work in your communities. Because I think a lot of individuals are working, but now they need to have like grassroots community efforts. Anyway, thank you all so much. We're at the end. It always flies when we're having fun and when we're learning new things. We have been with Mark Jacobson at Stanford University and Rahul Srinivasan with the Sustainable Energy for All. And we thank you all for being with us. You really have made us smarter today. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, in your workplaces, at the water cooler, in the grocery checkout line, and across your kitchen table. so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is a result of a trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like yourselves. And each of those tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up one way or the other to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you for listening in today, and join us again next week for more Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, and listen to any of our past shows on podcast wherever you get yours. Thank you.